The following is a presentation of the Match Talk Podcast Network.
Hello, wrestling fans. It's time for the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. The World Wrestling Resource was made that you as a wrestler, parent, coach, or fan can have access to all the resources of the very best in the world of wrestling. I'm three-time wrestling writer and broadcaster of the year, Jason Bryant, and I want you to join me, along with John McGovern and world champions Terry Brands and Dennis Hall, as we talk training tips, topical discussion, mental preparation, and more on the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. World Wrestling Resource is sponsored by Defense Soap. Find World Wrestling Resource on Facebook at facebook.com/World Wrestling Resource and follow us on Twitter at WWR60. And, of course, on the web at worldwrestlingresource.com. Now on to the show as we join John McGovern, Terry Brands, and Dennis Hall.
Here with Larry Papadopoulos, the treasurer of Wrestling Australia, as we are in the final day of Gold Coast 2018, final day of wrestling. You've been one of the broadcasters and commentators throughout the course of the action. First of all, what's it like to have an event like this in Australia?
It's an opportunity. It's a great opportunity for every sport that's involved to grow, not only in membership, in people coming to practice that sport, but also in development of our systems, of our processes, of our administration.
You know, when people talk wrestling, and the countries that come to mind aren't typically the oceanic countries, as specifically Australia, which kind of anchors this continental championship, if you will. And what's it like to try to grow wrestling in this country and grab kids at a young age and try to develop into senior level athletes?
Australians love contact sport. We've got a love for football, so we love rugby league, rugby union, Australian rules football, all heavy contact sports. We like outdoor sports. So if wrestling was always outdoors, I think we'd have more people doing it, but we don't. Our challenge really is there's a great pool of athletes, a great pool of kids that would love wrestling because they love the contact component. It's just how do we introduce them to the sport? How do we make it attractive to them? And how do we draw them away from our traditional sports of rugby league, rugby union, cricket, etc. As far as developing Australia, we're on the right path. We just need a little bit more, guidance. Unfortunately, we're all volunteers that run the sport in the country. We don't have any professional full-time administrators, and the people that are there are doing their best, but it's just not enough. It really needs a big helping hand. Need to put a little bit more cash into it if we can get that, and hopefully there'll be some growth.
When you look at your background, I mean, how did you get into wrestling here?
I originally was a judo player and was competing at Australian University Championships. Had a pretty bad knee injury, dislocated my knee. Was told never to play sport again. And I was looking at something combat-wise, and I saw Greco-Roman, and I saw that there was no leg trips or hooks, so I thought that might be safer for my knee, and that's my introduction to wrestling. So I started a little bit late, but had a good judo background, quite a good judoka at the time. Competed nationally, only competed internationally at a couple of events later on, one in Greece, and then as a veteran further on. Unfortunately, not much for Greco-Roman in Australia. It's not one of our peak sports, so I never got the opportunity to represent Australia at any of the major championships there.
When you look at the development of wrestling in this part of the world, you've got, again, the oceanic nations are trying to do it there, and you're getting multiple athletes and try to get more people involved. Most places it's a one-entry sport, and you see it in the South American countries and even here in the oceanic nations in this part of the world, that when you get an athlete that goes to world championships, they're wrestling both Greco and freestyle just to maximize their opportunities and experience. So to do that, what for a wrestler in Australia, what do they have to do to probably have an international type of schedule?
Our number one wrestler here this week was Jayden Lawrence. Through some really generous support by Jack Cowan. Jack Cowan is the owner of, I think it's called Burger King in the States, but he owns Hungry Jack's in Australia. He is just given non-stop to help Jayden succeed. He's sponsored him and supported him to train overseas. It costs money. He's a prime example of what a little bit of money, a bit of planning and help from people can produce in Australia. Our biggest issue here in Australia is, what I feel as a wrestling nation is, we don't try and support and to develop our Oceania partners, so those smaller nations. We should learn from other sports like sevens rugby, rugby league, etc. The athletes are getting from the Polynesian nations, the Samoans, the Tongans, all those Fijians, etc. They're incredible athletes, and if we support them and get them stronger, what it'll mean is our Oceania region will get stronger. Yeah, for a long time, Australians were quite happy just to sit back and say, yeah, we win the Oceanias every year. There's nobody really strong there. And then when it came to stepping up to the world level, especially at Worlds or any kind of international tournament, we just don't have the competition behind us to get there.
As far as the Commonwealth Games here, it's been hosted here now 5 times historically. It's my first time here, obviously, being an American. Everybody here thinks I'm Canadian for some reason because, obviously, United States is not in the Commonwealth. Go figure. But the experience, it seems like the Australians really have come out to really support. It's on like 9 channels here. I mean, you can't go anywhere, and it's the sports that aren't necessarily. It's not just it's not just the big sports that are the money sports in the States. I mean, we're seeing a lot of swimming, a lot of track, a lot of athletics. We're seeing a lot of this lawn bowling stuff. I'm like, what is this stuff? I mean, what's really cool is the whole nation seems to really be entranced by the Commonwealth Games. And what's that make you feel in terms of how they've embraced it here again?
I was fortunate enough that I was here for the 2000 Olympics, was part of the workforce helping out. Australians love sport. They love to see people participate. Obviously, they love to win. Traditionally, it's sports like swimming, hockey, rowing, stuff like that. And I think the Olympics gave us a taste of some of those other sports. And the Commonwealth Games is a great example of Australians embracing all sports, looking for sporting heroes in, not those high-profile sports, and having a crowd here like this for a wrestling tournament. A lot of Australians coming to watch is fantastic.
Yeah, it's one thing, and as an announcer, I've got the role. I've got to explain the rules, and here's the thing: the rules of wrestling, thankfully, since 2013, are a lot better again. You can watch the sport again. It's easier, even in the arena, to explain the sport. What's it like for you, knowing that your viewership probably has very little, probably even less than maybe some of the people here? That usually people here are watching because let's go watch the wrestling. I know a little bit about wrestling. You're in a television. You've actually probably got to dumb it down even more so than the sports-specific experts.
Yeah, I was told I was being too technical, using a lot of technical terms. So basically, I've had to say, put your right arm here, and he's got to put his left arm there, and he's got to catch that right leg and turn his hips in. So commentating it more of a coaching style, like as if I was coaching somewhere. Calling the move doesn't mean anything to the people that are viewing it. And just trying to explain it as simple belly down or belly up or finding someone's front makes it a lot easier for people to understand. It's been a learning process for me, and I'm going to take a lot away from it. It's made me more aware of what I need to do to help promote the sport, and if an opportunity like this comes again to help commentate in wrestling, I think I'm going to be pretty prepared to do it.
You've also had the opportunity to work with Canada's Christine Nordhagen, a 6-time world champion. Unfortunately for her, the Commonwealth Games didn't have women's freestyle wrestling when she was a competitor. It's only been now in its 3rd cycle. But what's it like been to work with a very fun figure like Christine?
Fun. It's one word that describes her, and just full of energy. Wonderful person. Full of energy, sharing as much information about the Canadian team to the other commentators. That's been a real great help. I haven't had that much information to give her. Our wrestling kids here don't have a big history, or there's not that much. There's a couple of interesting stories there, but the professional commentators we're working beside, who are helping us along, are really appreciating her knowledge and what she brings to commentating.
As we look at the sport of wrestling moving forward, and here in this region of the world, there's got to be some hook, and you've been using that hook and teaching wrestling to people in other sports. So what's that been like to try to draw the rugby players into wrestling and vice versa, using the techniques to help their sport, and maybe in turn they've become interested in it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been doing, wrestling for contact sports. That's what I call it. It's wrestling for contact sports. I've worked with national and international teams in both rugby union, currently working with the Rugby Sevens, the Sydney Roosters, which is one of our highest profile rugby league teams, and the Sydney Swans, which is, one of our highest profile AFL teams. And it's quite interesting. When I first joined some of the AFL, they had this mantra, and it was about run and wrestle, because there's a lot of running in the sport, and they recognise the need to wrestle, to tackle people. A real common term now in rugby league, it's a contact sport, people running at each other and then making contact and then trying to grapple each other. And now you hear the term all the time, hit, stick, wrestle. So, they've recognised that wrestling is not only done on the mat, but it's done in all these contact sports. And when you look deep enough into those sports, there are people in those sports that are excellent wrestlers, though they've never wrestled. The only problem is they don't know how to explain some of the principles. And, that's where people like me have come in. What I've done is I've brought things into those sports. Now, sometimes the coaches have been very honest and said, not applicable, not relevant. Don't worry about it, and I've done that. Other times they've embraced things and they've either adopted a drill or a technique, or they've adapted it. And that's what's been fun working with other sports. I looked at it as an opportunity not only for me, for work, etc., but a lot of those athletes now from those sports have embraced wrestling or grappling, and they love watching it. They're actually quite educated with it, and quite a few of them actually do it, if they get a chance. And a few ex-players, current players still grapple or wrestle when they get a chance, and that's really important for us. One thing I keep saying, if we could convert some of our rugby league, AFL, rugby union players to wrestling, I think Australia would be earning a lot more medals. They'd be up on that podium a lot more often.
You'd also have the draw because they'd be like, hey, I remember that guy. I mean, you'd also have a little bit of a celebrity factor to it, which I think would be pretty cool. But when it comes to wrestling in the United States, we have our youth league, then we get to your middle school, and then our high school. In our high schools and our secondary education before we go on to college and university, if somebody wants to wrestle in Australia, what is their process? How do you how do they go through? I mean, how does sport actually? I guess the question's for any sports. How are organized sports structured here at, say, the high school level?
Look, the traditional sports, those ball sports, the football sports. Yeah, they're part of the school program. Wrestling has never been part of a school program. It's been done in a lot of youth clubs around different states in New South Wales or Queensland. So it was very popular. It's actually quite disappointed. When I first started wrestling, though I came in late to it, I remember championships with about 20 people per division, and these are local tournaments. And then they've dwindled right down. Numbers are really low. There was a lot of poor management from Australian wrestling for a long time. We're on the way up, but very, very slowly. It was quite sad. There was a description given to wrestling by the Australian Sports Commission at one stage. It was like they're watching the Titanic going down to the bottom and everybody trying to steer it, they're fighting to get their hands on the steering wheel. And I think we're slowly working our way back up, but it's going to take a lot more work than what's been done so far.
From what you've seen from United World Wrestling, ever since the Olympic scare 2013, there's been a real push for education, coaching, development. Matter of fact, Lucas Okalakan he's been on loan for the Commonwealth Games from United World Wrestling. And what have you seen from, into those developing countries, into Vietnam, into the oceanic regions about education on coaching? I mean, how beneficial do you think that's going to be in the long run for Australia?
Very, very important. I've actually done coaching courses with the group that will not be named anymore, the previous UWW group, and they were really a joke. It was just people getting out in front of you, talking at you, expecting you to learn something. Nobody really wanting to spread knowledge or create processes or pathways for coaches.
It was a vacation for them too.
Oh, absolutely. It was actually quite pathetic. And I remember coming back from those courses thinking, well, I learnt nothing here, made a couple of contacts. The only way to learn anything about wrestling was to actually go to great wrestling nations and train with them, which I did. Then I was part of the grappling group, which was in there too, and I was part of the education process trying to push it. And, it was really frustrating, again, very few people doing the work and no processes or pathways. And suddenly after the scare, I started hearing stories about, coaching courses and new pathways and education courses and educator courses, and then having been involved in helping hold those in Australia. We've held 2 in Australia so far, educated a heck of a lot of coaches, and actually watching the back end of that course, watching how the educators work, what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve. It's been really refreshing to see that in UWW. It gives me a lot of hope that they're on the right path. And, watching a lot of those things that were put in place by someone like Lukos, having worked with him over the last couple of years, it shows me that, they're on the right path, and I just hope that it maintains its momentum. It'd be really sad to see that stop. I'm hoping it will continue.
A couple things. I'm going to get off on the wrestling topic just for a minute, but talk about, the rugby and Aussie rules football a bit, because I was watching it. Okay, we're here on Saturday, the last day of wrestling in the Commonwealth Games. So Friday Night Football. I'm flipping through the channels. I've got rugby and I've got Aussie rules football. I've got a Sharks-Dragons game that ended up being really fun to watch. I mean, I know enough about rugby to kind of understand it, but Aussie rules football, I have no freaking idea what's going on. Okay, you can't throw it. You can punch the ball for it. It was just, it was an amazing game. And hearing our producer here, Hollywood, explain it, it's like you can't throw it. Then it's like you run like 20 kilometers a match. But and you were saying, what was it? Run and wrestle. Run and wrestle. Well, it's like wrestling. Wrestling's like Aussie rules football without the ball and the running. So, but for somebody that's never seen it, how the heck do you score and do this thing? I know that Adelaide was down big time last night, and it was. I was trying to figure out how they could come back.
Yeah, they've got 4 goalposts. They've got 2 big ones in the centre and 2 on the outside. That's either end of the field. If the ball is cleanly kicked between those goalposts, it doesn't have to be on the fly, it can roll through. If it doesn't touch an opposing player or the goalpost, the team can earn 6 points. If it doesn't make it through the 2 centre goalposts and goes either side with the second lot of goalposts, then they earn 1 point. So there's the 6 points, and then there's the 1 point. It's played over 4 quarters. Each team is obviously given the opportunity to kick those balls when they're in contact with the ball. They've got to run every 15 metres. They've got to bounce the ball, or they've got to pass or kick the ball. And it's called a hand pass. So they're basically punching it out of their own hand and passing it. There's a lot more to it. The other rule is if you can kick the ball and catch it on the fly without it touching the ground or touching an opposing player, then the referee will blow the whistle, and that player will then be allowed to either stand his ground and kick to another player without being tackled, or he can, sometimes they'll just take off and go away. But it's a real simple game. Once you get to know the rules, it's basically, a good description is run, kick the ball, catch it, run, kick the ball, catch it, kick it between the posts. The added thing is the wrestling component is not only the tackling when you're on the ball. What people don't realise, one of my jobs in that particular sport is when there's a stoppage, when the referee blows the whistle and you can see the ball is dead, and it's about to be put back in play, either by the referee throwing it up in the air or one of the linesmen throwing it back in. There's a lot of jostling where the players are trying to move into a superior position to catch that ball and pass it on to another ball. So there's a lot of upper body wrestling there, and that's where a lot of Greco kind of stuff goes into it. So Aussie rules, their tackling is a little bit different to the other codes. They're not allowed to tackle below the knee, so there's no trips around the ankle, and they've got to be really, really careful about making any contact with the head, so everything's below the shoulders. It's a big concussion in sports is like the States now. It's a big topic here in Australia. Rugby union and AFL have got very, very strict guidelines. Any contact with the head, whether it be purpose or not done on purpose, will give you a foul. So the referee will blow the whistle and give a penalty to the team of the player who was touched above the head. Rugby league still has a little bit of contact in the head, but there's a lot stricter guidelines there.
I did see a headbutt last night, and then I saw a retaliatory headbutt, which is interesting as I'm watching it. They don't go down. I mean, you've got to hit them to go. That's not like watching the World Cup in soccer, football, and you see somebody just blows their nose and they're falling. Rugby guys, they're not falling down unless they're actually hurt. It's kind of cool to watch in that respect.
Yeah, it is what people don't realise in those stoppage times when the guys are there and they're jostling for the ball. Once the ball's thrown in, you'll quite often see guys punch each other or palm each other in the gut or in the sternum, and it's quite legal. So they're actually allowed to strike the opponent with what's supposed to be with an open palm, and they're quite often trying to win the other guy and to unbalance him and unsettle him. And it's a heat. It's like I said, it used to be years old. We used to have in rugby league all-in brawls where every member, it was like a hockey match on the field. And it was just blood and guts. And the referees referees would literally just stand back, wait for the dust to settle, blow the whistle, and then possibly send some people off for 10 minutes and then bring them back on. Now the rules are very, very strict. You throw a punch, you're out of there. If you
so you get the palm, right? Yeah.
In AFL it's palm, but if you throw a closed fist, you're out of there. You're not going to come back onto the field. But like I said, Australians don't mind. Now they're just worried about head contact. It used to be okay to punch people in the face in a football match. Quite strange.
I'm just thinking of that scene in the movie Slapshot where the Hanson brothers are brawling. The refs are like, too much, too soon, just sitting there watching. But Larry, anything else to add about the experience here at the Commonwealth Games? Maybe something that Americans might find interesting about Australian wrestling or combat sports in general that might say if next time if we've got somebody on vacation they want to find out some wrestling. I mean, how can you educate our American listeners here about wrestling in Australia even more than you already have, because it's been great so far?
Yeah, look, anybody coming to Australia, thinking that it's going to be the hotbed of wrestling in the South Pacific, no. But the people that are doing it here are very passionate about it. Australians have embraced a lot of combat sports. Things like jiu-jitsu and grappling are very, very popular. And it's a bit frustrating for me. I've done that as well, fought professionally in mixed martial arts and stuff. And it frustrates me to no end guys coming into wrestling to pick as much out of wrestling as they can to take it back to their sport. And I try and get them to embrace wrestling and stick with it. But there are a lot of clubs that have wrestling in their club, though competing in wrestling is not their main focus. So, where there's a will, if you come here to Australia and you want to do a bit of wrestling, maybe not to the level of, the Olympics, but, guys to push around with, guys to move around with, and then be friended by people, there is quite a bit of wrestling here.
Actually, and that does bring up one thing that actually a lot of the newspapers did talk a lot about wrestling here leading into it, because a guy named Rob Whitaker, UFC champ, he was set to compete as there were 8 spots for wrestling. He was the 9th guy. Somebody pulled out. He was supposed to compete, and then I believe the UFC said no, that's not good. But it actually got people talking about wrestling because you got a very famous combat sports guy in the biggest fight game in there, the UFC. And how much did that buzz at least kind of maybe help with people recognizing wrestling here at Gold Coast 2018?
I think it was positive. Definitely positive having him there. We got a lot of press out of it. I know that... the press jumped on it as soon as they heard that the UFC star Rob Whitaker was actually trying out for the games. We had a large delay before we could announce the team. Rob was the 9th man. We had one person pull out just within, I think, a week before the final announcement of the team, and Rob was put in as our 8th person. It was very, very disappointing for us to see him pull out with only 2 weeks to go, and our number 2 in that weight division was the only person that could step up and be our 8th person. I said bitterly disappointed, because I think if Rob had stayed here, he was in with a chance to get on the podium. Maybe not the gold or silver, but definitely good enough to medal for Australia. And it was really a wasted opportunity. What it has done too, unfortunately for him, is if he did want to come back to the sport, he would have to he would probably have to retire from the sport of MMA to prove himself that he won't do the same thing again. And he's admitted as much in an interview he gave. He realised that having pulled out of the Com Games kind of effectively eliminates him from possible selection of a future Australian team to any major competition. And, the guy is just an incredible athlete. He's a competitor. It's the kind of guy we want to get involved in the sport. We don't have the money there. The other thing too is, it's all about sacrifice too. What's your sacrifice? You're going to give up a pay packet. I know Rob, was talking about losing the opportunity to earn a lot of money, but I think what people are going to understand is everybody that came to these games, not just from Australia, from all around the world, they had the same risk of injury.
Well, Jayden Lawrence also just had a baby too. He hasn't really been able to train. I mean, he's been back and forth from home with a new child.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was a premature baby that had a couple little difficulties there. Jayden flew. He was in the village for 2 days, got the call, flew back, had the stress of worrying about a baby that was preemie, there with his girl, and then he flies in the day just before he has to weigh in and expected to compete. I know he dropped a lot of weight as well. A lot of stress. He was well underweight for this. I think he only weighed in at about 82 kilos, which is really light. Yeah, guys were coming down from 92 to compete in that division. But, that's a big sacrifice. A lot of people say, no, I'm going to stay there with my my newborn son. Congratulations to him. I think wonderful for him. But that shows the level of sacrifice. And that's what a lot of these athletes have done here. And I think hats off to every athlete that turned up to these games, putting their lives on hold and laying it on the line.
Larry Papadopoulos, thanks for the lesson on Australian wrestling. It's been extremely educational. Thanks, man.
My pleasure. And if you come down under, you can look for me at Sydney. Just go to my website at boxingworks.com.au. That's my gym. I can always point you in the direction of good wrestling clubs or grappling clubs for anybody coming to Australia.
Subscribe to the World Wrestling Resource Podcast by going to WWRpodcast.com and check it out on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, or wherever you find your podcasts. World Wrestling Resource at worldwrestlingresource.com.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.